Senator from the Northern Territory and Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. Her election night speech was so articulate and moving that she upstaged opposition leader Peter Dutton a bit and made the Prime Minister's speech look every bit the waffling mess that it was.
Firstly, I want to thank the Australian people for believing in our nation, in our great nation, in the goodwill of this country, and understanding that the vast majority of Australians want what's best for each and every one of us, including our most marginalised Indigenous Australians. The Australian people have voted overwhelmingly say no to this referendum. They've said no to division within our constitution along the lines of race. They've said no to the gaslighting, to the bullying, to the manipulation. They've said no to grievance and the push from activists to suggest that we are a racist country when we are absolutely not a racist country. We are one of the, if not the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And it's time for Australians to believe that once again, to be proud, to call ourselves Australian, because until we can be proud, we can't form a position where we can be strong to tackle our tough issues within our country.
Bravo. Senator Price said a majority of Australians understood that this was simply a bad proposal, that the government simply failed to provide adequate detail on.
When we kept asking questions, we weren't receiving any answers whatsoever. We could not be shown with any clarity, or it could not be demonstrated how this proposal was supposed to support our most marginalised Indigenous Australians.
Senator Price opened up also about her own personal experience in the days leading up to the vote.
My family experienced 3 funerals yesterday. For me, my family are still sitting in communities where largely they have been exploited for the purpose of somebody else's agenda. This referendum has yet been another one of those agendas, where it was suggested that 80% of Indigenous Australians supported this proposal when we knew that was not the case.
Since this speech, the Yes campaign and the mainstream media have been jumping through hoops, looking at booth-by-booth data, trying to claim otherwise. It's almost impossible to exactly calculate the level of Indigenous support for the thing. But let's be completely honest. If this voice was any good at all, it would have received 100% Indigenous support. And we know it was nowhere near that. In some places, it fell below the 50% mark.
And it has been a shame that throughout the campaign that we have been accused of misleading this country through disinformation and misinformation when it was a campaign of no information whatsoever. The Australian people were misled, and the Australian people saw this for themselves. And that is why the Australian people decided to vote no to this proposal.
The Shadow Indigenous Affairs Minister says she realises there is a lot of work to be done to heal our community.
For those of you that voted yes, please know that we as a coalition have always got the best interests of all Australians at heart. We want to make sure that we are fighting for a better future for all Australians. But going forward, we need to prioritise where our most marginalised are. As I've always said, the gap doesn't exist between Indigenous Australia and non-Indigenous Australia. It exists between our most marginalised that we know whose first language isn't English, who live in remote communities, and the rest of Australia, including the middle-class Aboriginal Australia that are doing really well for themselves, for ourselves. We need to focus our efforts to where our marginalised exist. And we need to listen to their voices. And as Peter said, no longer listen to the voices of the activists, of those pushing ideology onto us. The Australian people have said no to this. The Australian people want practical outcomes, a unified country where we can move forward together.
It's inspiring stuff. My prediction is that Jacinta Price will be the first Indigenous Deputy Prime Minister of this country. And maybe not in the next 3 to 6 years, but eventually the Prime Minister. She'll have to move from the Senate to the House of Representatives and probably from the Nationals to the Liberals for that to happen. But she's already called for an audit of spending this week in Parliament and immediate action to alleviate violence in remote communities. And she also revealed this week that her parents, their Alice Springs home, had been vandalised with red paint, and that her father had had an egg thrown at him during a TV interview. Disgusting stuff. Another truly amazing Australian is 67-year-old businessman and founder of the Aboriginal Chamber of Commerce, Warren Mundine. It's been an emotional ride for him too, this campaign. He rightly lost the plot at the stupid political questions and gameplay from journalists at the final press conference after the vote on Saturday night. And he scolded them for not putting the focus where it needs to be, on real solutions for real problems. Here's how Sky News captured it.
You know what? People are committing suicides in these communities. People are being raped and beaten, and this is the questions you come up with? Where's about getting results? Getting people reducing suicide, and instead of this nonsense that you people carry on with. It's about time. We had a vote tonight that said Australians want to get things done. Well, stop talking about all this other nonsense and actually start talking about those kids and those who are young as 9 and 10 who commit suicide in their communities, and those kids who get raped and pillaged, and people who haven't got jobs, for God's sake. You know, wake up to yourselves.
More power to you, Warren Mundine. We need our media copping much more of that. When was the last time one of these journalism school graduates were funded by their employers to head out to a remote Aboriginal community and do some serious reporting on reality? You know, when you lose a referendum, not 51-49, but 61-39, it's a good idea to maybe carefully consider that your idea was bad, rather than just thinking that the people who didn't vote for it are bad or calling them stupid. But the ABC's Queen of Woke, Pat Scarvellis, just had to do a little finger waving at the Aboriginal elder for not thinking like he is supposed to.
Thomas Mayer spoke to the ABC a little earlier, our colleague Isabella Higgins, and said that he's not angry with the Australian people. He believes the No campaign ran a dirty campaign of lies. There were many things that your campaign said that weren't true. Do you regret taking that approach?
I reject your what you just said.
The idea of dividing on racial division when there's already race in the Constitution, that's not factual?
Well, the factual is that I'm Aboriginal. All my life I've been told I'm a member of the Aboriginal race. My parents have been told that they're a member of the Aboriginal race, and therefore it is race. And Torres Strait Islanders is a race. Look, they tried to sell a furphy, which was that, you know, for 200 and something years, we've been classified as a race of Aboriginal people. And then when they want to put it in the Constitution, they say it's not about race. Well, it is about race.
Oh, she's just seething with anger. Pat Scarvellis is a taxpayer-funded public broadcast journalist. And I'm sick of her using our tax dollars to platform her very own left-wing worldview. Do a podcast or pay for your own platform like the rest of us have to do if you want to indulge your personal bias, Pats. Don't do it on the public dollar. You have no right. Lots of people piled onto Waleed Ali, the host of The Project, for talking about the education levels of no voters versus yes voters. I'm actually going to do something I've never done before on this show. I'm going to defend a project host. I actually listened to all of what Waleed said, and he started by just citing data about the way the vote broke down across the demographics of education levels.
Basically, it kind of ends up being the elite argument. The more elite sector of society you are in, the more likely you were to vote yes. Yeah. The biggest dividing line seems to have been education. So if you are in a seat that had high levels of tertiary education, a bachelor or postgrad, then you were at the very top end of the yes vote. And if you had the lowest levels of tertiary education, you were at the low end of the yes vote. And that's not to say people who are educated know what they're doing and people who don't have tertiary education don't.
Right. Waleed is pretty much saying what we've been saying. This was a referendum that appealed to the elites, those from the inner cities who have tertiary education. Then he immediately makes the point that I would make. Those with a tertiary education might be more educated, but that doesn't necessarily make us wiser or smarter. And those tertiary educated in Australia in the past 50 years have been exposed to far more concepts of neo-Marxist identity politics, what we call wokeism these days, and are simply far more likely to write yes to a proposal based on race as a result of that. But it might have been what Waleed said next that got him into a bit of trouble.
It's about the style of the message, I think, and the concept of a voice is... I can totally see why you would propose it. If you go through the history, you go through the experience of the people who designed it or who came up with the idea, it actually makes perfect sense. But most people haven't been on that journey. And when you come to them with this idea that's actually quite abstract and complicated, they're going to respond with an instinct, and that instinct is it just doesn't feel
And then
right.
it doesn't help as well then when yes campaigners are calling people, you know, dickheads and dinosaurs because they can't get their heads
One
around
word.
it.
Good God. I also agree with Sarah Harris. What's happening to me? I think what Waleed is saying there is pretty patronising. He's saying that if you haven't been on the journey with us, you will have a different view. As if to say that if you had been on the journey with us, wise people, you'd naturally agree with us. Look, mate, we went on this journey on this show 6 months ago. Professor James Allen, the constitutional expert from University of Queensland Law School, who will join us later on this episode, he warned about all the implications of the voice going forward. That if the Chapter 9 that they wanted to add to the Constitution had gone in, then all sorts of implications would have opened up in future High Court rulings. So let me put another proposition to you. The ones who were behaving more unintelligently in all of this were the ones who voted yes. They were thinking with their hearts, not their brains. And that is a bit childish. It's an abdication of your responsibility as an adult citizen to take the time to really think. And I applaud most no voters because you were being attacked for being racists by elites. That's a disgusting slur. These elites are so full of their own self-righteousness that they could not descend from the moral high ground for 1 second long enough to even consider that they might have been wrong on this. Waleed was far from the worst offender in this regard from the kooky kids at the project. Far worse was the granddaddy of the show, Johnny Rove McManus, who made a special hosting reappearance before the voice vote precisely to use his failing show to scold us all.
Did my vote, I've got a postal vote, I did it the other day, and it's very simple. For Peter Dutton to say it's not properly explained or we don't have a compelling case, it is there. It says, do you choose to change the Constitution to include First Nations people by having an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? Yes or no. It's that simple. I wrote yes, my daughter was there, she got it, she's 9. She said, I can't believe anyone would vote no to this.
Because she's 9. She only understands this looks like something nice to do for Aboriginal people. She doesn't understand all the legal implications of the thing. You, on the other hand, Johnny, are 49. You should engage your brain as well as your feels, mate.
And that's what breaks my heart. What are we doing to ourselves? This is a real moment where we can be proud and show what a wonderful country this is. This whole cliche we like to put out of, we love to give everyone a fair go. We're not doing this. I know it has formal legalese in the wording of it.
Yeah, all that formal legalese stuff makes my little brain hurt. That formal legalese stuff, Rove, has real implications. And far from being dumb or mean, the Australian public was smart and kind enough to carefully consider those implications. They knew something wasn't right with this thing, and they were right. And you, sir, as your little show's declining ratings show, are out of touch in the extreme.
I know it has formal legalese in the wording of it, but all it is saying is when it comes to issues that directly affect First Nations people, should we listen to them? And we want to say no. That's mind-blowing to me.
Okay, maybe it's mind-blowing to you because you aren't using your mind well when you think about it all. That is not all it was saying. Changing the Constitution is huge. It sets the agenda for future legal interpretation by the courts of all laws. Also, we were never told what the voice was exactly going to be. It was a blank cheque. Albo could have easily had a bill drafted that had all the detail in it, but instead he went with, oh, we'll let you know the details later. Just vote yes or we'll call you a racist.
So whichever way you're voting, please think about what you're doing, think about the repercussions, and let's just be decent for once.
Yeah, be decent for once, you deplorables. So what you've just witnessed is the boss, the owner of that show, coming onto the set to scold Australia. Be decent for once, you peasants. The utter arrogance. And look at all the other little people on the panel, all terrified, or don't say anything, disagree with the boss. Honestly. And they wonder why they lost.